Hi, this is Ofori, the digital reader, and this is about the time of the month where I go over the books that I got on BookBub, the books that I bought, and the books that I read. I kind of am breaking apart the books I got on BookBub in a beginning section. I generally have a rule where I only buy half as many books as I read the previous month, and I've been holding to that rule pretty steadfastly until I started looking at BookBub. BookBub's books are just so cheap that what I did is I kind of did a little carve out where I'm like, I will give myself a budget of $10 a month to buy stuff that's on BookBub, and I'll break that apart from the books that I buy every month that are based off of how many books I read the previous month. No real reason why, except BookBub's books are incredibly cheap and they're just really interesting and stuff I've never even thought about reading for the most part, even though every now and then something pops up that I did want to read and I knew about, and it's at a great deal. I got 3 books. The total cost of all these books was $4. Generally at BookBub, I will buy a book if it's free. Well, I'll buy a book if it's under $2. Obviously, if it's free and I'm interested, I'll pick it up. I rarely pick up books that are free that I'm not interested in because I know I'm never going to read them. So the first book I picked up on BookBub is Witchnapped in Westerham. Now, a lot of the books I get on BookBub, I don't really know that much about it. I've literally read the blurb and the blurb sounded interesting, so I'm going to do the same for you. All it takes is one morning for Sydney photographer Lily Bianchi's life to go off the rails and over a cliff. A well-dressed Englishwoman turns up at her door swearing she's a witch. If that's not crazy enough, she explains Lily's brother James has been kidnapped and the Paranormal Investigation Bureau needs Lily's help finding him. And the craziest part? The Englishwoman tells Lily she's a witch too. Before she can say, "Where's my coffee?" she's on a plane bound for Westerham, England. Unfortunately, England's not as welcoming as she hoped. She's barely arrived before she gets set up, arrested, and almost shot. Things can only get better from here, right? Yeah, right. This book is a clean read with a sassy and fun heroine, witches, magic, action, women sleuths, and mystery. It sounded interesting to me, so I picked it up. The next book I got from BookBub is the second book of a very popular book series called Legendborn, and basically it's a riff. It's kind of like a young adult riff off the King Arthur series. The blurb: Aubrey wanted was to uncover the truth behind her mother's death, so she infiltrated the Legendborn Order, a secret society descended from King Arthur's knights, only to discover her own ancestral power. Now Bree has become someone new, a medium, a bloodcrafter, a scion. But the ancient war between demons and the Order is rising to a deadly peak, and Nick, the Legendborn boy Bree fell in love with, has been kidnapped. So I have the Legendborn book, the first one. Hopefully I'll be reading that in 2025. And this one was $1.99, so I couldn't help but pick it up because it's a pretty popular series that I'm interested in reading. And the next book is The Dragon Apocalypse, the complete collection by James Maxey. So this is 4 books in one, and once again, $1.99. The swordsman known only as Infidel sets off on a quest to kill the great dragon Great Shadow and retire in style with his treasure. Things don't go quite as planned, setting the stage for an epic 4-book adventure spanning 20 years as Infidel and her roguish allies struggle to prevent the dragon apocalypse. You had me at Dragon Apocalypse, to be honest. So those are the 3 books I picked up off of BookBub, and next I'm going to be talking about the books that I bought that were not BookBub books that generally I paid full price for. Next up is the books that I bought. I read 4 books last month. The first book I bought was Lady Eve's Last Con, and here's the blurb. Ruth Johnson and her sister Jules have been small-time hustlers on the interstellar cruise lines for years, but then Jules fell in love with one of their targets Esteban Mendez Yuki, sole heir to the family insurance fortune. Esteban seemed to love her too until she told him who she really was, at which point he fled without a word. Now Ruth is set on revenge. Disguised as provincial debutante Evelyn Ojukwu and set for the swanky satellite New Monte, she's going to make Esteban fall in love with her, then break his heart and take half his fortune. At least that's the plan. But Ruth hadn't accounted for his older sister Sol, a brilliant mind in a dashing suit and much harder to fool. So this sounded interesting. Also looked like the lead characters were characters of color. So definitely wanted to give this book a try. The next book is a very popular book right now. It's Leigh Bardugo, The Six of Crows. A lot of people have been calling it kind of a Lord of the Rings heist movie. Definitely, because it's got a lot of BookTube recommendations and it's fantasy, I figured I'd go ahead and take a chance on it. As far as the blurb, Ketterdam, a bustling hub of international trade where anything can be had for the right price. And no one knows that better than criminal prodigy Kaz Brecker. Kaz is offered a chance at a deadly heist that can make him rich beyond his wildest dreams, but he can't pull it off alone. A convict with a thirst for revenge, a sharpshooter who can't walk away from a wager, a runaway with a privileged past, a spy known as the Wraith, a heartrender using her magic to survive the slums, a thief with a gift for unlikely escapes, 6 dangerous outcasts, 1 impossible heist. Kaz's crew is the only thing that might stand between the world and destruction if they don't kill each other first. So that definitely sounds like a heist movie, sounds interesting. Figured I'd take a chance on it. And the last book I bought in November is Winter by Winter by Jordan Stratford. When the enemies of King Ragnar destroy Lada's village, she'll do anything it takes to lead the survivors to safety, even agreeing to marry the king himself. But Ragnar and Lada both quickly discover that there's more to her role than that of a queen. As she assumes the burden of Shield Maiden and Admiral of the Swan Fleet, guiding her own ships among Ragnar's, her calling to battle becomes clear. She's been chosen, blessed by the goddess Skathi, and her enemies will fall before her blade. Winter by Winter brings to life Hadagertha, the historical teenage Viking pirate queen from the Chronicles of Saxo, and presents a heroine whose cunning and heart resonate across the centuries. Once again, sounded good, sounded in my wheelhouse. It's definitely a go for me. And now for the books that I read in November. So I am completely caught up on the Lady Sherlock series. Book number 8 is A Ruse of Shadows. And A Ruse of Shadows is about Lady Sherlock being hired by her paramour, Lord Ingram's older brother, who was a spy who went bad and now he's in jail. And his lieutenant has disappeared and he hires Lady Sherlock to find that lieutenant. And then you throw in the fact that he has a grudge against Lady Sherlock because she's one of the reasons that he got caught with his hand in the till when he was a spy and ended up in jail in the first place. So he hires her to find out what happened to his lieutenant. Hijinks ensue. This was one of my favorites of the books. It was a really good 8th book. It kind of felt like that Sherry Thomas was hedging her bets. Like, if this is the last book in the series, it was a real good ending. But she did leave some room for there to be more books. So I'll have to see what happens. This was a really excellent book. If it was the ending, it was a great ending. Obviously, I'm hoping it's not because I like these series so much. For this, it was definitely a big plus for me. So I'm going to go ahead and give it 5 stars. The next book on my list is The Father of Spin. This is the biography of Edward Bernays, and Edward Bernays was a key figure, one of the original public relations creators of that whole field. And his life almost reads kind of like a who's who. He kind of was one of the people who really was a pioneer in public relations. He worked for presidents. He worked for foreign dignitaries. Of course, he worked for Big Tobacco. He worked for all of these huge companies. He's actually one of the reasons that, he actually is the reason that the typical American breakfast is toast, orange juice, bacon, and eggs. And that's because bacon and orange juice were two of his clients. And so he kind of created this campaign that made that our national breakfast so that people would buy more orange juice or more bacon, because at the time people were leaning more towards continental breakfasts of like coffee and toast and then out the door. The end of his life isn't as fascinating, but it's still a really, really great read. I thoroughly enjoyed it. I would recommend, if anybody has any interest in stuff like Mad Men, the TV series, as far as how they came up with ideas and how they swayed public opinion to make people interested in stuff that they wanted to sell, this is that book. One other really cool thing is he went through this whole campaign where there was this cigarette company. You know what? I'm not going to spoil it for you. I've promised y'all I won't go in depth with books to spoil it for you. And he just had such a life of magnitude as far as who he worked for and, his place in public relations. This was a 4-star book for me. I have to say, a lot of times with biographies, I rate them based on the person's life. And he had an incredible first half of his life. And then the second half, tailed off a bit and didn't interest me as much. So that's why I give it 4 stars. The next book I read was the Greene murder case by S.S. Van Dine. The reason I actually bought this book was because I had read The Big Sleep earlier in the year by Raymond Chandler. And in one of the areas of the book, somebody was telling Philip Marlowe, "You're no Philo Vance." And I was like, who is Philo Vance? So I looked into it, and Philo Vance was a very popular murder book series back in the late 20s. And I had never heard of him. So I was like, if this guy was kind of an inspiration for Philip Marlowe, I'm very interested to see what's going on there. I was disappointed. If this book was written in the last 50 years, I would have given it 2 stars. It was pretty formulaic. It used a lot of junk science. It had some of the tropes and stereotypes that, because I'm a modern day person, I just couldn't take the solving of the murder as seriously, because I kind of knew that some of the stuff was junk science. It just was pretty by the numbers, and it was just like, let's just sit around and wait for people to die. It just wasn't really a great book. It was an okay murder mystery, but considering this book was written almost 100 years ago, I had to kind of give it a pass in that a lot of stuff that I consider boring tropes and junk science now, back then, 95 years ago, it was probably pretty groundbreaking. And considering that this book was an inspiration for Raymond Chandler to cite that person as "you're no Philo Vance," and Philo Vance is the detective of the tale. So these are the Philo Vance murder mysteries, and this one is the Greene murder case. But knowing that, I'm going to give this book 3 stars, since I consider this an early attempt in the murder mystery genre, and a lot of stuff that seems rote to me and junk science to me at the time was probably pretty innovative. So I'm going to give this book 3 stars. And the last book I read in November was Kurt Vonnegut's Welcome to the Monkey House. The best short story I ever read was a short story that I read when I was about 14. And when I read that story, it stuck with me my whole life. It was just this incredible story that I always remembered. But as the years passed, I just completely forgot who wrote it, and I actually forgot the name of the book, but I remembered clearly what it was about. And through the miracle of Google in modern times, I was able to put in what the book was about, and it came up. It was a Kurt Vonnegut story called Harrison Bergeron. When I heard that, I was kind of like, oh snap, because one of the best books I ever read, I actually read when I was in high school for a book report where they give you a list of books to pick. And the book I picked was Cat's Cradle by Kurt Vonnegut. And that was also an amazing book. It had kind of like this M. Night Shyamalan Signs thing going on, where there was all this stuff happening in the book. And then in the end, he just ties it all together, kind of like fate, that all these things happen to create this end result. It was an amazing book. So going through Kurt Vonnegut's Welcome to the Monkey House, which is a book with a series of short stories. It has probably about 20, maybe 15 to 20 short stories. This guy is an amazing writer. And there's two main reasons he's an amazing writer. One, his characters seem so realistic to me in the way they talk to people, in the way they interact. Even when his characters do crazy, stupid things, you often say, yeah, that's something a human being would do. You know, his conversations just never seem fake or forced with his characters. The other thing is, there's just wide variety of short stories. He does not focus on any one subject. He is all over the place. You know, he's basically talking about kind of a countryside overview of someplace in Boston. He's talking about science fiction. He's talking about a whole bunch of things that some of his stories, I don't even want to tell you what they're about, because once again, it's going to spoil it. But he just goes all over the place, and 90% of these stories are just, you're reading them and you're just like, wow. The other thing he does that's incredible is he'll talk about something that maybe doesn't seem important, and as you're reading the book, it just kind of hits you that he's kind of using this subject to maybe talk about something deeper. And some of his stories just seem straightforward, and they're just good, straightforward tales. Anyway, I was floored by Kurt Vonnegut. I remembered why he has two of the favorite things I've ever read, and definitely I look back in my library of books I've already bought, and I was happy to realize I have 3 of his books. I will definitely be reading those 3 in 2025. And my goal for next year, if possible, is to read all of his novels. So I can go through. I've already read Cat's Cradle, but my goal is to read all of his novels in 2025, because Welcome to the Monkey House, if you want to be taken on a roller coaster ride of short stories in different subjects, this is it. And above everything else, these stories are 50 and 60 years old, and so many of them still just resonate. So I guess there's no surprise that I'm giving this 5 stars. So that's my book life for November. The books I got on BookBub, the books that I bought based off of how many books I read the previous month, and the books that I read, my general impressions, and what I rated them. So this is Ofori, the digital reader, and keep reading.